A blind woman named Sarah is talking to a stranger who has been tormenting her for days. Seemingly gone mad, Sarah heads to the basement to end her life. But when she felt the person's presence again, Sarah changes her mind. But as soon as she takes off the rope, someone kicks the stool. The stranger takes a picture of her hanging body and prepares a set of hospital tools. Meanwhile, Sarah's twin sister Julia, who lives far away, suddenly collapses. Sensing that something is wrong, she decides to visit Sarah with her husband, Isaac, and there, they find her dead in the basement. Sarah and Julia both had the same disease that would eventually make them blind, although Sarah's vision deteriorated earlier than Julia's. The police officer declares it a suicide, suspecting that Sarah got depressed with her blindness. However, Julia insists it is not, as Sarah was waiting for a donor to restore her vision. She believes that someone murdered her. The officer tells her about a blind woman named Soledad, whom Sarah always talks to. Julia visits the old lady and learns about a place for the visually impaired called Bauman Center where Sarah had made new friends. Julia decides to visit the place and there she overhears blind women gossiping about Sarah and her boyfriend, going to a hotel in Bella Vista. The women notice Julia's presence and question her. When Julia introduces herself, they inquire about the man she came with. Julia is confused because she came alone, but the women sense someone standing behind her. Julia sees someone walking out, so she runs after him until she reaches a dark room. She is about to approach him, but the stranger flashes his camera and manages to escape. Subsequently, Julia's eyes are starting to weaken. She tells her husband what happened, and Isaac got mad because the man could have been dangerous. He wants them to go back home, but Julia managed to convince him to have a vacation in Bella Vista. They go to the hotel that the blind women were talking about. Julia secretly asks the staff about Sarah, but her record seems to have been deleted. While Isaac is away, a waiter approaches Julia and mistakes her for Sarah. Julia learns that her twin sister had undergone eye surgery, and this leaves her confused as to why Sarah has to end her life when she is about to be cured. She tells her husband about this, and Isaac reveals that according to the doctor, her eye operation was not successful. As Julia is about to leave the hotel, a janitor named Crespillo approaches her and says he found a key in Sarah's room after she left. Julia asks about her sister's boyfriend, and Crespillo says the man parked his van nearby, and a CCTV could have a footage of him. As Crespillo is warning her about that man, Julia suddenly feels someone standing behind her, and as she chases him, he is already gone. Her husband suddenly appears, and Julia asks his help to check the CCTV footages. Isaac is very mad because Julia chased the man again. He goes to get the footage but doesn't return. When Julia goes after him, Isaac is already gone, and so is the footage. She asks help from the police to find her husband and mentions the stranger who is following her. Meanwhile, Crespillo is taking a bath when someone suddenly cuts off the light bulb, electrocuting the old man. The police later find his dead body, and Julia is convinced that the stranger killed the janitor and kidnapped her husband. Because of too much stress, Julia suffers another seizure, making her eyesight worse. The doctor says she has less than a month before she goes completely blind. Julia returns to Soledad to ask about Sarah's boyfriend, but she says Sarah does not trust men. The old lady shares that her husband left her, and it is only her son Angel who took care of her for 10 years until he suddenly went missing. The police later call, saying that they traced Isaac in a motel, and there they found his wedding ring. Another officer interrupts and says that the patrol saw someone at Julia's home. At the house, the inspector goes upstairs to check the room, and at that moment, Julia hears a noise from the basement. She goes down to investigate, but due to her poor eyesight, she couldn't see anything. While feeling around, she touches a man and gets scared, yelling for help. The inspector rushes down to her, and as the lights come back on, they see Isaac hanging from the ceiling. Unfortunately, Julia remains unable to see as she has gone completely blind. The next day at the hospital, the inspector informs Julia about Isaac's letter. Isaac admitted to having an affair with Sarah before her death and took his own life because of the guilt. A few days later, Julia undergoes an eye transplant and has to keep bandages around her eyes for a week. She stays at Sarah's house, and the hospital assigns a caretaker named Ivan to assist her. One evening, Julia has a nightmare where Isaac and Sarah attempt to remove her bandages. Terrified, Julia wakes up and hears footsteps outside. She calls Ivan, and he advises her to leave the house. She manages to escape just as someone takes the key that Crespillo had given her. The police arrive the next day, but they find no evidence of a break-in. Ivan takes excellent care of Julia, changing her bandages, preparing meals, and they enjoy listening to music together. One evening, Julia invites Ivan to stay a bit for a drink. She reminisces her memory with Isaac, and Julia imagines talking to him until they kiss. Ivan says he can't do it, and he leaves. While Julia is sleeping, a man is preparing a syringe behind her. The widow felt his presence and wakes up, and as she turns behind her, Julia managed to get out of the house and runs into the neighbor Blasco. The old man brings her to his house, and as Julia asks him to call the police, Blasco says the line is out. Julia is shocked to find her sister's key, so she takes it and immediately escapes the house. She calls for Ivan, and the caretaker immediately goes to her rescue. Afraid to go back to her house, Julia asks that Ivan take her to his place instead. There, Julia reveals finding Sarah's key, and she believes that Blasco is the man who killed her husband and Sarah. Ivan leaves briefly, and while he is away, Blasco's daughter Leah comes over. She admits to spying on them, and reveals that she was the one who stole the key. She claims to be a friend of Sarah, and she knows the identity of her sister and Isaac's killer. It is her own caretaker, Ivan. Julia initially doubts it, but Leah says that the key unlocks Ivan's secret room. They try to open the secret room, but the key is missing. Leah explains that Ivan will drug her and make her go blind, just like what he did to Sarah. She tells Julia to wait for her in the bathroom, and Leah quickly hides just as Ivan arrives. In the bathroom, Julia takes off the bandage ahead of schedule, but fortunately, she can already see clearly. As she sneaks out of the bathroom, Julia is shocked to see pictures of her and Sarah on the wall. She goes looking for Leah, only to find her lifeless body stabbed to the wall. Terrified, Julia sits in a corner crying when Ivan enters the room. She says that she tried taking off the bandage, but gets upset to find out that the operation was not successful, and thus, she is still blind. Ivan tests her eyes with the knife, and he believed her claim. In the kitchen, Julia finds out that Ivan is drugging her tea. Julia switches her cup with Ivan's, but the caretaker becomes suspicious, so he leads her to the freezer and asks her to open it. Inside is the dead body of the real Ivan. Julia gasped inadvertently, revealing that she can actually see. Ivan assaults her and brings her back to Sarah's house. However, Julia managed to run away until she reaches Soledad's house. She asks the old blind lady to call the police, but Ivan arrives before she can. Ivan refers to Soledad as Mom, revealing that he is actually her son, Angel. Despite Julia's plea to call the police, Angel convinces Soledad that he is not a bad guy. Manipulated by Angel, the old lady hits Julia with the phone. It turns out that Soledad can actually see. Angel is mad because his mother tricked him, so he chokes Soledad and takes out his tools to make her truly blind. Julia later regains consciousness and finds out that Angel had already injected her with a substance. All that the madman wanted is for her to become blind so they could live together forever. As Angel attempts to kiss her, Julia seizes a knife and stabs him in the legs. She manages to escape the basement and locks him inside. Unable to exit the house, Julia calls the police. Just as Angel breaks the door, she extinguishes all the lights in the house. As the fight between them ensues, Angel managed to pin her down, but Julia gets to hit him with the camera. The police arrive, and Julia grabs the officer's flashlight to shine it on Angel, revealing the madman. Now with nowhere to run, Angel slits his throat, ending his own life. Several weeks later, Julia, at the hospital, discovers that the damage to her new eyes is irreversible due to the substance that Angel injected into her. In her last few hours of vision, Julia asks to see Isaac's corpse, and finds out that her husband donated his eyes for her transplant. She later goes in front of the mirror, looks at her eyes, and smiles. Did you like our movie recap? Please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. To be updated for new movie recaps, hit the notification bell.